there are some misconceptions about meditation and the spiritual life that involve the idea of higher states, levels of awareness and higher self. And that doesn't appeal to me, the idea of equating enlightenment with something higher, because that infers that there's something lower. And so you're in this extraordinary state of consciousness, and there's a kind of ordinary consciousness that people are experiencing in the world around you. So the spiritual teacher sets themselves apart by being in these higher states of consciousness, or higher states of self, as it were. And if you see enlightenment as one, then there can be no comparative states. And so I would say all states of mind are altered states of mind, or altered states of consciousness. So if you're in waking consciousness and then you go to bed and have a dream, you don't say, I'm in a higher state of consciousness, or you have a vision and you say, I'm in a higher state of consciousness. They're different aspects of the psyche, and because we don't really know how the psyche is structured, you can't really say that there's a higher and lower level, as it were. I mean, if people go on astral travel, they may go to all kinds of places and meet all kinds of entities. And as John Lilly said, who developed the isolation tank and took a lot of psychedelics and studied altered states of consciousness, and he said that wherever he went in his astral travel and met all these beings of light, beings of all kinds, he was very skeptical about saying that they were objectively real, other than that they were a product of the imagination. So you take a psychedelic, and within a few seconds you could see entities, you could see planets and universes and whatever people describe in their altered states of mind, but it doesn't make it objectively real. Whereas when you're in enlightenment, there's no doubt that it's real, it's objective and a fact. So in the Buddhist tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the psyche is seen as a process of thought forms, what they call Maya, the veil of illusion. And it says, O nobly born, know that all these apparitions that are appearing in your mind, in your consciousness, are a product of your own intellect. Don't get deceived by them. So there's no doubt that in the Tibetan system, transcendental wisdom is when consciousness is occluded by nirvana, and the snuffing out of the candle is really the snuffing out of the visionary faculty. And as the Zen say, the Satori, oneness, wholeness, is the most simplest thing in the world. I mean, literally the most simplest thing in the world. I mean, if I think of sitting here now, with the awareness of Satori, because it's nothing, then by implication it's the simplest thing there is. And as they say, it's your original face. There's nothing simpler and more innocent than a child. One day, I mean, science one day will try to find out, or they are trying to find out probably, what is the state of a child? What is the consciousness, the condition of the child? They love measuring states of mind and parapsychology and all these so-called yogic states of mind and meditation and all of that. But why? Why are they tabulating that? Why are they gathering that information? What do they want it for? And so many people in the New Age and the East and West and Buddhists and Zen people and all these people comply with these scientists and have their brain waves measured and all this kind of stuff. I mean, even Krishnamurti talking to a quantum physicist, Professor David Bohm, I mean, what's that all about? What are the motives of both the scientist and the meditator? What are they up to? Why do people come from the East to the West? Followers of Ramakrishna, Maharishi, bringing it to California in the late 19th, early 20th century, setting up their ashrams and temples and all over the West. What's their motive? We know that many of them were very wealthy, they got a lot of support, massive following, because they're in a higher state of mind. And the Western person thinks, they want to be in a higher state of mind. But what do they want from that higher state of mind? What do you want from parapsychology and the siddhi powers of the Rishi? And Krishnamurti set up his school in India in the Rishi Valley. Krishnamurti was known to practice healing and very seen as a holy man and in India, and advising Indira Gandhi, the president of India, and she was up to no good. I mean, there's a lady in Delhi he met, a young lady and her sister, and they're together one night, and he takes a candle and goes in each of the rooms and comes back to them and says, "Oh yes, I've just freed the house from evil." I mean, they're two young ladies. Why is he doing that? Why would any spiritual person go around the house with the candle and say, "Oh, I freed the house from evil"? Because of power. You've got the power to do that. You're a holy man. You can get rid of those things, impressing the young ladies. And the yogi can be in the cave in Tibet and keep their body warm, get the psychic heat, get the pranic energy working, kundalini, and they can sit there with just a piece of cloth around them in the freezing cold. Well, you might say, well, if you go to the Eskimos, aren't they doing that? Aren't Eskimos living in the ice all the time? But they're not impressed, are they? They're not coming down into America and Europe and saying, look what we can do. I mean, if you develop your muscles in the gym, obviously you can lift heavier weights. And if you do something with your thought process, obviously you can alter your brain waves. So what? I don't see any freedom in that. Is that freedom from conditioning? That's all conditioning, all the altered states and the parapsychology, all that stuff, that's all conditioning. That's not freedom. Say one thing and do another. And these Sai Baba in India supposed to materialize these things from out of nothing. They can materialize things, and people in the TM, Transcendental Meditation, say they can levitate. So what? Why are people so impressed? Isn't it clever? And again, a kind of pseudoscience. I mean, the beauty about the one, the beauty about enlightenment, is that you can't manipulate it. There's no power in it. There's no control in it. Oh, I can control my breath. I can control, what goes on under a microscope. I can control what goes on in CERN, in the Hadron Collider. I can control children at school. I can control people in the family. Herd the animals together. The group mind, the herd instinct, the hive mind. I mean, when I was a child, my best friend was very talented. He used to just get up and stand on his hands and walk about on his hands and play the piano, and didn't impress me. What impressed me was my grandmother and her kindness. That's what impressed me. I went to stay with her in the summer, about 8 years old. I was in Oxford and she was in Manchester, where I was actually born in her house. It's about 160 miles away, and I was sent by my parents on a coach, on a bus, all on my own. And I travelled and got there. And she was known to, have this sense of grace. And you felt that, I was very aware of it, her kindness. That's what impressed me, and my grandfather, very peaceful, quiet people, unassuming. That's what impressed me, and my mother's the same. But my brother's not like that, my sister's not like that, my father wasn't like that. Genuine quality of affection. I mean, when you see these gurus, do you think of grace and affection and kindness? I doubt it. They maybe could perform that way, But no, they're always tricking up to tricks. They're always impressing people, going to the source of creation and always labeling and super consciousness, or there's a video of Krishnamurti, I think it was 1960s in California, at Ojai, where they bought some land and had a school there, and he dropped out of the Theosophical Society when he was 34 in 1929 and went on his own. Got to know Aldous Huxley in California and kind of got into the jet set. I think he was just part of the jet set of the 50s and 60s. And eventually, in his 70s, he got together with this lady, Mary Zimbalist, and I think she was involved with Hollywood and the moguls and the film industry. So he's talking to a small group. So they're basically sitting in chairs, and he's sitting cross-legged on the floor. And he's not dressed in an Indian thing. He's pretty much in the American style of dress. And to me, when I see him, he just seems very almost predatory, very self-assertive, very self-assured. And you really get the feeling of him talking down to people, like, I'm the authority, and they're hanging on every word. And of course he's from India, therefore he has to be the authority. And he gives an example of the kind of power. And he says, and it's in the tradition of yoga, and he says that when he's asleep, he's awake. So in the deep sleep, he's actually awake and watches the dreams appear and disappear, or arise and decline. And I thought, how facile. When I heard that, I thought, is that what the tradition's all about? Is that what people kind of donate their money towards, achieving that higher level? Oh, I'm awake while I'm asleep. And I've heard other people today in the modern period talking about that, measuring the brain waves and all that kind of thing. And another thing he said is that, when you're in a higher state, then you don't dream anymore, And I would think, well, what's wrong with dreaming? I mean, everybody dreams. I mean, what's so superior about not dreaming? As if there's something wrong with dreaming, as if there's something wrong with sleeping. Really, see, it's incredible, the trickery and the silliness. And he was a rather silly person, actually. I mean, his actual personality was very silly. I was at Brockwood Park at the school in the 70s and 80s, and I got to talk to Professor David Boehm, and I sat at the head table, as it were, with the principal of the school, Dorothy Simmons. I was a friend of hers, and I would visit the school during the year and everything. And there was this French girl, and she used to visit me in Oxford, and she was camping outside. You know, people came from all over, a lot of hippie type people, and I was a hippie type person in the 70s anyway. And they'd build a fire and play the bongo drums and guitars and singing and camp in the apple orchard and so forth and so on. And she said, oh, I was staying in the school. I mean, I had no money, and the principal let me stay free of charge in the school, which was quite expensive. It's a big white mansion. So it's quite sophisticated group of people. And outside there were just people, as I say, camping out. And this French girl wanted to come into the house and have a meal, so I arranged it so she could come and have a meal, and I sat 2 seats away from Krishnamurti at the top. So we sat at the top and we could see the whole dining room, and she sat opposite me, and she couldn't take her eyes off of Krishnamurti. She was just absolutely focused on Krishnamurti. And suddenly my body got very, very light, almost levitating, almost. And I got so light that my whole body was like a leaf in the wind. You know, when you see a leaf in the wind, it's just rustling in the trees. It's light as a feather, just this leaf blowing in the wind. And that's just what my body was, almost levitating on the chair. That's the effect in the presence of Krishnamurti. I wasn't doing anything. I was in Enlightenment. I've been in Enlightenment since 1968. And so I'm always aware of being in Enlightenment. But that was the effect he had on me. Whereas my Enlightenment didn't bring about any effect in my mind and body in that sense. So I didn't equate enlightenment with parapsychology or the Siddhi powers or anything, because I've never meditated and I've never followed anything from the East. Although I've been to the Himalayas and met a Lama, very famous Lama, and all of that, and I've studied the sacred texts very deeply in Egypt and the Bible and Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, but I've never practiced anything. But I've never equated enlightenment, which is freedom, with consciousness or the psyche or anything like that. But that's just the effect he had. One year, I go there, I think it was the last time I saw this girl, and I knew her from the early 70s right through to the 80s. So this is the last time, anyway, I saw her, and she said, oh, why don't you come down to my caravan and this evening? So I go down to the caravan in the evening, and we go inside, and she puts the candle on. I'm sitting there and I hear her laughing. She's just laughing to herself, standing a bit away from me. And I wondered what she was laughing at. And she came down in front of me, sat in front of me, and this is absolutely true. Her face turned into a golden disc. Her actual face was a pure circle of pure gold light. This is a fact. And I just looked, and I just said, I better go now, and I left. And I never talked to her about it. I've never found out about it. I've never had that experience before. But I'm just saying, these things do happen. I don't know what state she was in, what process she was in or anything like that. But again, you can see why people would be impressed by levitation, by these kind of transfigurations and transformations and mutations and all kinds of strange things. Now, yes, I'm interested, and I've studied parapsychology very deeply as part of the inquiry into consciousness studies and Jungian studies. But I've never felt to identify with those or cultivate those in any way. So I don't know how she did that. It's the same with my friend, Professor Roderick Mayne. I mean, he can visualize, since he was a child, he could just sit down and visualize and go right back into ancient times and things. But he's not impressed with that. He doesn't use it, he doesn't record anything, and yet he's a specialist in Jung and synchronicity and mythology, but which in Jungian studies they cultivate active imagination and go into their psyche, like Jung did. He wrote a book called The Red Book about all these entities and visions that he went into. And he said that he thought that some of those entities were real. They were real beings living in a real world inside the psyche. And he said that when you die, you go into the psyche and you live in the psyche, because he saw human beings only existing within the psyche. So even if we're here in the physical world, he says we're still in the psyche. We're really in the psyche. So not everybody's impressed with the powers of the psyche, the powers of the mind, the altered states of consciousness. One year at Brockwood Park in Hampshire, the conference lasts about 10 days, and I used to stay, and everybody goes away, and it's very empty, a few students, a few people around that organise the conference. Krishnamurti is there, and you know, small group of people having a meal and such. And I was ready to go, so I'm leaving, and I go past the Oast House, this octagonal building called the Oast House, and I hear a voice saying hello. And I turn around, it's Krishnamurti. I go over to Krishnamurti, and his voice became my voice. So when he said hello and I said hello, it was almost like a mirror. It was almost like an echo, as if you echo back. It's like two English people speak the same language. You say hello, whereas if you were in Turkey, you say a different word. But it was like that. It was a kind of quite an intimate mirroring of our voice, of our energy. And I go off, and I go down the hill, get on the bus to Winchester, and then I get on a coach and travel back to Oxford. So it's probably about 80 miles, and it's going through a Celtic valley called the Vale of the White Horse. So I'm on this coach, and I'm sitting right next to the driver at the very front of the coach. And people on the coach are probably coming from, some of them are coming from the conference. suddenly the whole world changed, right? So what I was seeing in the coach, in the world around me, in the valley, everything changed. And it became an enchanted valley. It became a different world. It was everything I was looking at looked the same, except it was like an overlay. It was just like someone put an overlay on everything I was seeing, and it was spellbinding. It was like hypnotic, spellbinding, and it went on for a long time. I don't know, half an hour. And it was so impressive that I wanted to stand up and say to people, well, can you see this? Can you feel this? Can you experience it? It was very, very powerful. And I don't know what it was. I don't know what level. I don't know what dimension. I don't know what state of mind or altered state of mind, but I didn't experience any shift in my brain. You know, there was no change in my brain, there was no change in my nervous system, there was no change in my thought. It was just simply like a light went on invisibly, and you were just in this other level. And then when it finished, there was no effect. It just finished. No effect at all. And the same thing when I sat next to Krishnamurti, my body was light as a feather, and then it just stopped. Without any effect on the body, in the sense in the brain or in one's thought. You couldn't kind of locate it, measure it in time or anything like that. So I see that experience on the bus as an influence of Krishnamurti. I don't know how he did it. I don't know what happened. I don't know what power he has or what ability he has. But in the 60s, he kept a notebook, and I think in the 70s, he kept a journal of his experiences. And this is what he says. He was walking along, and there was an old lady, very old lady, probably in the Himalayas or somewhere, maybe the Rishi Valley in India, I think. She's just walking along, and he was just saying how old she looked, very frail, and you could see she had a hard life, and you got kind of the suffering in her, the lines of her face, that kind of thing. And he said he entered her body. So he actually enters her body and can look through her eyes. That's what he said. So did he do that with me? Did he transfer his consciousness into me? Because in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about consciousness transference. So they do talk about that idea of consciousness transference. The same with astral travel. You know, people say they can go into other people's houses and look around and actually be seen by the people in the houses. I mean, over the years, I've had hundreds of apparitions appearing in my house, here. UFO type things, and dolphins swimming about, and Greek gods, and just people milling around. They're walking through me, they're walking around the room, and I've seen hundreds of people in grey, in a grey robe, in lines, and they reminded me of the shades of Hades that wait on the shore of the river Styx, and then they're ferried over to Hades, the underworld, and the ferryman Charon will only accept when you're dead souls. So you've got to have died in order to be ferried across to the underworld. And I've seen loads and loads of apparitions, and I've never been frightened by anything like that, never disturbed me. And they're just something, because I've inherited a psychic ability from my grandmother, the one that was very graceful and kind. And when I was staying with her at a young age, she took me to a place where there were psychic people. And she actually said, when I was born in her house, and she said to my mother, "Oh, he's been here before," as if I've lived here before. And now the point being, is it right to enter another person's house? Is it right to enter another person's body? Is it right to enter another person's mind without their permission? And also, why would you want to do that? Why are we impressed by that? Is that a higher thing? More powerful? I mean, in society, there's a hierarchy of capability. You know, someone's more clever than you, more talented, more famous. They have more money, more property. They can paint a better picture than you. They pass exams. And all this hierarchy, and people go up and up the social ladder. And isn't that the same in the psyche? These people are going up and up. And they think by climbing the stairway to heaven, as it were, that they're going to eventually become enlightened. Now the Buddha, evidently it's all hearsay. I mean, they say there's records of the life of Buddha, but I don't think there are any records. So different schools of Buddhism, they write the story differently about Buddha. But anyway, he's supposed to have lived 500 BC, which was the time of classical Greece, when you have Plato and people like that. And what they do say, though, is that he had two teachers, obviously in terms of knowledge. You know, they were teaching him the kind of yogic knowledge and everything. And then he leaves them and goes becomes a forest hermit and lives with a group of ascetics, yogis. And so they're doing yogic meditation, as it were. And then he gives that up, and they say he has a meal. And the idea of him having a meal is like he's coming back to normal. Now he's eating like normal people, so to speak. And he symbolically, I don't think literally, but symbolically is supposed to have sat under the Bodhi tree, the Bo tree. And he was visited by the god of evil, Mara, in the dark of the night, as it were. Jesus was visited by Satan as well. So when he was being crucified on the cross, which is a tree, you know, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as it were, the tree of the serpent, the tree of death. And then Buddha's visited by a Naga, and the Nagas are the ancient serpent kings, the aboriginal serpent kings of India, before the Aryans, before the Hindus, and they're noted as the initiates of wisdom. So it's showing that Buddha's of a tradition of Buddhas that were connected with the serpent kings, the Naga kings. And in fact, much later, in the 1st century, Nagarjuna, in a vision, went to the dragon castle of the Nagas and was initiated. And when he came out of that vision, he then wrote a book called The Doctrine of the Voidness, which is the actual first book written on Buddhist enlightenment, as it were. It's the first book about the void and about nirvana. So Buddha, through the night, he sees the morning star, the sun comes up and he's illuminated. The point being that Buddha gave up knowledge, which means to me consciousness, and he gave up yogic practices, and he sat under the tree. Now, I think he was maybe living in his family home, he could have been in a temple, he could have been in a cave, but I think the tree is universally symbolic. Because after his enlightenment, immediately the family were around him, and his friends and family, the ascetics. So obviously he was in the vicinity of his home. So does the development of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, CD powers, levels of awareness, all of that, does that get you there? I would say I doubt it. So that when he's under the tree, as it were, I think he's come to the end of his tether. He's exhausted everything in his mind and body that he can do, that he can practice, that he can think about. He's had his life review, he's thought about his lives, he's thought about his past. He's kind of exhausted everything, and he tethers himself to the tree. He says, I'm not going to leave here until I'm enlightened. But what he's also saying is, I don't know if I'm going to be enlightened. I don't know whether I will be enlightened. But I have nowhere else to go. I have nothing else to do. So he's back home. He's gone on his journey. He's left home. Because he left home at the age of 29. He's back home at the age of 35, 36. And then he's enlightened. So, I mean, in the original so-called story of Buddha, which was probably written by people after him, just like the Gospels are not the record of Jesus. Nobody knows anything about Jesus, so really nobody knows anything about Buddha. And it's what people think he might have experienced, what people think Jesus was doing, or what Buddha was doing. But so, upon entering enlightenment, it's seen as liberation. You're free, and you're an individual. You're indivisible. You're not an identity. I'm a yogi. I'm this. I'm that. He's free of consciousness, he's free of egocentricity, which again, any form of altered state would be ego-bound. In the Buddhist tradition, all thought, all consciousness is ego-bound. It's Maya, it's the spider in the middle of the web that's going to devour everything. So ultimately it's soul-destroying and self-destructive. I mean, that's the nature of consciousness. So freedom from conditioning is freedom from self-deception. Another interesting thing is that I've heard quite a few people today talking about Satori enlightenment. Now, if consciousness is thought, intention, motive, concentration, can you direct thought, consciousness, attention, can you direct it to emptiness? Can you talk about oneness, openness, emptiness, Satori, enlightenment? Can you direct consciousness to that? I would say you couldn't. If I'm in a state of enlightenment, and which I am all the time, to some degree, my friend comes to visit me, Professor Roderick Main, a Jungian specialist, knows all about parapsychology, knows all about religion, knows pretty much everything you need to know about the psycho-spiritual experience, but he never talks about enlightenment and never claims to be enlightened. And I've known him for 32 years and he still comes to visit me and we sit together for 4 hours. It's only recently that I've begun to talk about the state of enlightenment that I'm in. After all those years, it's only now that I'm beginning to open up to him. And yet I lived with him for years and years and years, and I've been enlightened since I was 23. But I never talked to him about it. We never referred to it. But he knew that things happened when we first met. That there were kind of very powerful experiences of synchronicity and other things that happened. But I never referred to that in terms of my enlightenment. I think that was just my psychic ability that I inherited. But anyway, I never confused the two, so I never talked about enlightenment. But we ended up living with Celia Green, who wrote books on out of the body and coined the term lucid dreams. She was in the Society for Psychical Research, and so was my friend. So I'm saying that although it's only been recent in the last year or so, which is 2018, I mean, I had my awakening in 1968. And as I say, I've known him for 30 years, but I never brought it up. We never talked about it. Because I wasn't identified with Satori, because you can't be. You can't be identified with Satori. You can't direct attention to Satori. You can't make it happen. You can't bring another person into Satori like that. So all this thing of Krishnamurti coming into my mind and body, or going into the mind and body of an old woman, all of those tricks, because they're really psychic tricks. They're like when the magician on the stage performs all those tricks. I'm not saying they're all fake or illusion. I mean, the whole of Maya and consciousness is illusion to the Buddhist anyway, but no, it's not that necessarily you can't do that. I mean, I saw the face of that young lady. I mean, her face, I saw that with my own eyes, as it were. So people, we all can, I mean, maybe we all can do extraordinary things at some level in our life. And I've certainly met many people that can do all these things. Not that I've ever met anyone that can materialize objects, move objects, telekinesis, or materialize things. I've never met anybody that can do those things. And I'm not sure that those things are possible, but they may be possible, but I'm not sure that they are actually possible. So anyway, the last 6 months or so, I have been relating to him what it's like to be enlightened, what it's like to be in Satori, what it's, so forth and so on. And but when I'm telling him, I'm not thinking I want him to be in Satori. I'm not trying to convince him about Satori. I'm not trying to say that it's the best thing in the world. It's the highest thing in the world, the most important thing in the world. God is the most important thing in the world, or something like that. So I don't see it like that. I don't see it as something to package and actually label and say it's the highest thing in the world, like going to Oxford University is the highest thing in the world, or putting a man on the moon is the highest thing in the world, or reading someone's mind is the highest thing in the world. I mean, quite frankly, it doesn't really matter to me whether my friend's in enlightenment or not, or whether everybody on the planet's in enlightenment or not. But I think that every child is in enlightenment. I think that every adult has experienced enlightenment. But in the West, we're not aware of it. We don't have the language. We're not conscious of it. And maybe at some time I might talk to my friend and examine it a bit more clearly, and maybe reference certain things in his life, and maybe he'll realize that he's already enlightened. But I haven't decided what to do, and it's not a plan. I don't plan to turn him on, as it were. I mean, when we went to London in 1988, he'd just finished Oxford and in classics, and we went on a kind of journey or a quest or something to London, and all these extraordinary things happened with synchronicity, extraordinary things. But they just happened. I mean, I wasn't trying to do that. I didn't intend to do that. I wasn't looking for that. But I knew that those kind of things always follow me around anyway. And then, he was involved in it on a deep level, and that caused him to read Jung and study synchronicity. Now he's a world scholar, the leading world scholar on Jung and synchronicity. That all just unfolded naturally. He wasn't trying to do anything, I wasn't trying to do anything. It was just a friendly relationship, and these things happened. But when you go to an ashram, when you go to a school, you want things to happen, and that's the problem. Because your intention, your thought, your consciousness is trying to gain influence and power and become empowered with these things and such. And there's a problem there of identification, of ego. And you get caught in the web. I mean, if you ask me, in the spiritual world, as it were, of the 20th century, 21st century, who are the authentic people, I'm not going to say, because I don't really know. But I can critique certain people, and I don't use people's names. But if you if you go to Oxford and you study philosophy, you have the right to criticize other people. You have the right to challenge them if they think they have a theory. If you're a scientist and you develop a theory, say string theory or theories of multiverses or exoplanets where there might be intelligent life, people have a right to criticize and challenge you. But you see, in the spiritual thing, it's people tend not to do that. Although the main people like Jung, Gurdjieff, Steiner, Blavatsky, Krishnamurti, Crowley, they didn't like each other. None of them liked each other. When they crossed paths, they went to each other's place, they always said something negative or derogatory or something about them. But I don't feel in competition with anybody, so I don't have any negative feeling whatsoever. So if I say something about Krishnamurti, I mean, I enjoyed going there, and I mean, it was a good experience for me. I'm not trying to negativize him as a person, but I think if somebody writes a biography of Krishnamurti, as someone did, this young lady, and reveals the fact that Krishnamurti in California in the 30s set up a foundation, and this friend of his became responsible for the archive, and he was an Indian, had an American wife, and Krishnamurti seduced the American wife, and they had 2 abortions. Now, in the 30s, having an abortion would be a tricky thing, but he wanted to cover the fact that he was a holy person, had this image of himself, and didn't want his image to be tainted. And yet it's all right for her to go into a very dubious situation and risk her life. So a daughter wrote a biography of Krishnamurti in the 80s and the 90s, whatever, and it's terrible, his behaviour. And we know that a lot of these gurus, their behaviour is exactly like that. And of course that's what people in power do. I mean, politicians, celebrities, they misbehave, and they behave badly, and they're quite treacherous and quite ruthless. So it goes with the hierarchy. If you're going to play that game, always being top dog and a predator, then you're going to develop a psychopathology, megalomania, you want world power. That's the danger, that's the pitfall. And they say a skeleton in the cupboard. No, I think there's the ordinary consciousness that we've all got, and then there's the extraordinary experiences, you could say extraordinary aspect of the consciousness, but it has nothing to do with enlightenment. I mean, I've met many spiritualist mediums. I've seen things happen, and I'm mediumistic to some degree myself, and Krishnamurti certainly was mediumistic. And as I say, enlightenment is innocence, it's nothing, it's free. It's right here in the room now. And it doesn't interfere with anything. It doesn't interfere with your extraordinary consciousness. It doesn't interfere with your ordinary consciousness. It doesn't depend on your power. It doesn't depend on your prestige. It doesn't depend on your status. It doesn't depend on any book. It doesn't depend on history. It doesn't even depend on karma or your past lives. It has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. So really, because it's empty, it's no thing, it's freedom, it's something in itself. It's like a beautiful bird that flies into your garden. You see it and it flies away. You don't know where it belongs, you don't know where it comes from, but you know something special. Not special in the sense of property, that you're going to put in a box, in a jewellery box, a diamond ring or something. But in fact they do talk about the Buddha in Enlightenment being in the diamond body. But of course the diamond is pure carbon. It's the life force, it's the pure life force of the universe. There's carbon, diamond dust throughout the whole universe. We're all made of diamond dust, carbon, the life force of the organic world and nature. It's curious that the crystal is a symbol of perfection and actually being studied today scientifically for its involvement in the creation of life. So again, you could say enlightenment is the life force of not just the universe physically, and not just the psychic universe or any other dimension, but the whole of reality. It's the breath of life that breathes into creation, the animation of the spirit, the numinous. So you could say enlightenment in the embodied everyday sense is everywhere. It's right waiting to appear. Once you, as they say, you clean away the dust on the mirror. And they say one of the attributes of the Buddha is the mirror-like consciousness. Akshabhya is mirror-like consciousness, pure reflection. You see the world as it really is. You see yourself as you really are, which is oneness, emptiness, innocence. Yeah, I mean, enjoy a movie, enjoy a book, enjoy walking through the park, enjoy a dream, enjoy a vision. There's nothing wrong with enjoying, extraordinary things. But just don't mix it up with enlightenment. That's my view. Don't be envious. If my grandmother was seen as a very graceful person, do you want everybody to copy that? Or for people to be themselves, to value the beauty of life? And because people have their free choice, as it were, people can choose to meditate or not, or choose to be interested in enlightenment or not, or you know, maybe life will change them, maybe it won't. My grandfather was different from my grandmother. I mean, my grandfather wasn't a particularly graceful person. Everything's still here now. The flag is drooping, it's absolutely still. There's a few starlings on the weather vane. It's very misty, quite dark, darkish for the midday.